Hello, and I'm back. Hold on, fix the camera. Alright, I'm back. Now let's look at another objection to the causal principle. Whenever begins to exist has a cause. In our last video, we looked at the objection from the subatomic realm, or quantum mechanics, I think it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong. Another objection that we'll be looking at now is that the causal principle only applies to things within our universe, but not the universe as a whole. Now, this treats the causal principle as some sort of physical law, like the law of gravity. Like, it doesn't apply outside the universe, it only applies inside. But the causal principle is not a physical law. The causal principle is a metaphysical principle, and thus it applies to all reality. It applies even outside the universe as a metaphysical principle. Metaphysics, in case you don't know, is the branch of philosophy which studies that which is beyond physics. So metaphysical really literally means beyond physics. So this principle is a metaphysical principle, and thus it applies to everywhere in all reality, even outside the universe. So now that from objection is covered, let's move on to our next objection. Now, our next objection is rarely mentioned by any professional philosophers. This objection comes from the conservation of energy or matter. The conservation of energy is energy cannot be created or destroyed. Now, this objection appeals to the idea that nothing really begins to exist. But just to say that everything exists merely changes form but never began to exist. Sorry, hold on, let me rephrase that. Basically, they're saying nothing really begins to exist, everything just changes form. Now, this is just this is a horrible objection, first of all. It shows a misunderstanding of the conservation principle, and it's just bad ontology, too. According to this reasoning, everything that exists right now has always existed. So, according to this reasoning, I have always existed. Well, that's obviously false. I mean, I have not always existed. I mean, did I exist during the Triassic Age? Did I see the dinosaurs? Was I there when the Big Bang was there? Of course not. This is just absurd. This objection is not even worth mentioning. Usually the objector will challenge the proponent of the causal principle to show him or her of anything that began to exist. Well, I'd like to take that challenge for a minute. I began to exist. There was a point where I didn't exist at all. Now, that's all that is needed to show this objection as fallacious, is the counterexample that anything began to exist. Well, I just gave a counterexample. I mean, it is obviously false that this objection it's not even worth mentioning. I mean, I don't even know why people even consider this objection as valid. As William Lane Craig put it this way: if such a conclusion is not evidently absurd, reflect. I have certain essential properties without which I cannot exist. For example, it is essential for me that I am a human being, but my atoms prior to my conception were not a human being, therefore they were not I. So what he's basically saying is that we have essential properties, stuff that makes us who we are. Something that makes us who we are is if any of those properties are not present, then I cease to exist. For example, it is essential for me to be. I don't want to say the same thing as Craig, but fine, human. It's essential to me to be human. So before I was born, my atoms are there, but they were not a human being, so it wasn't me. See what I'm saying? This tends to confuse who we are with what we're made of, and that's just absurd. And our last objection is one of the most common objections that you'll hear in popular media. And this is just, well, I would like to say this question is valid, and I understand if somebody asks it out of pure, uh, honest, they ask it honestly and sincerely, wanting to know and not answer that. But most atheists ask this question as a sort of, aha, I got you type of question. But I will answer it to anyone who really sincerely ponders this question. If everything has a cause, then what caused God? This is just an understanding of the argument. First of all, the argument says whatever begins to exist has a cause. That leaves exclusively anything that hasn't begun to exist. It's just whatever begins to exist has a cause. So this principle excludes any eternal eternal being. And of course, the atheist is entitled to an answer to objection, so here it is. Since God is a being who never began to exist, he is a metaphysically necessary being. That means he is necessary. God is a metaphysical necessary being. Therefore, God has no need for a cause. And we'll get back to that later. Maybe like in video 6 or something. Yes, it's going to be that long, so now we move on to the second premise, and I'm just answering common objections to the argument. I'm not going to go to the more complex, more philosophical objections to the argument. Maybe I might do that later on once I brush up on that topic. But this is just a very bold, answering common objections type of video series for the average layman and for the church, average churchgoer. So next video we will answer the universe began to exist and the defenses for the premises and typical objections. Thank you.